Hello, everyone. It is 10 o'clock Pacific time, 1 p.m. East Coast time, where our guest speaker is located. And welcome to the second in our webinar series hosted by Autism Society San Francisco Bay Area and Parents Helping Parents. I'm your host, one of your hosts, Jill Escher, and with me is, well, not with me physically, but virtually with me is Trudy Grable. Trudy, say hi.
Good morning, everybody. And afternoon if you're on the East Coast.
And we are very pleased to welcome today Ryan Wexelblatt speaking on Guy Stuff, teaching social expectations around hygiene and puberty to young men with verbal ASD and Asperger's. The history of bringing Ryan into our webinar series is pretty simple. Last summer I was at the Autism Society of America conference in New Orleans. And I was in a session that was pretty boring, okay? I mean, I hate to admit it, but it was pretty boring. So I left, and I walked kind of randomly across the hall to see what else was going on. I walked into Ryan's session and thought it was just fantastic. I thought this is a guy who not only knows what he's talking about, but he's also a great presenter. So when we talked about starting a webinar series, Ryan came to mind, and he very generously agreed to do a webinar with us. So thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
And let me move to the next slide. Just to let everyone know, we have 6 webinars so far scheduled. One has already been done and it's archived, the Autism Job Club. So check out autismsociety.org/webinars to register for any of our other wonderful webinars. Next week, this time next week, we have Tom and Emily Island speaking about autism and the criminal justice system and what happens when someone with autism is detained or approached by police. I think that's a really important topic. And we're probably going to add some more. Trudy, would you like to introduce Ryan?
I would love to introduce Ryan. Ryan has been working in the field of special education since graduating from Bryn Mawr College of School of Social Work. Did I say that right, Ryan?
Bryn Mawr.
Bryn Mawr.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
He has dedicated his career to helping children, adolescents, and young adults who present with ADHD, social anxiety, Asperger syndrome, learning differences, and higher verbal autism spectrum diagnoses. He's with the Center for ADHD that offers innovative programs for boys who need help developing their social cognitive skills. These programs include Guy Stuff, How to Hang Out, Social Anxiety Groups, and Safe, Smart, and Social, a program to teach safe and appropriate internet safety and social media use.
Thank you, Trudy. Now here's some logistics for everybody. Let's see, if you have questions, so Ryan will present, and then at the end we will take questions. Those questions should go into the question bar that you see in your control panel. And then Trudy and I will pitch those questions, however many we can fit in, to Ryan. If you're listening to us and you can't see the presentation screen, sometimes it's hiding under your browser, so take a look. All of you attendees are on mute, so feel free to be as noisy as you want. If you're calling in and you're not on your computer, feel free to email any questions to Trudy at trudy@php.com. Also note that this presentation inherently includes mature topics, so just an FYI on that, and that it's being recorded. It will run for about an hour to maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And we will post a recording of the webinar on the webinar website, and the link will also be emailed to everybody who registered for this webinar. Okay, so with that, I am very pleased to turn it over to our presenter today.
So thank you, Jill, and thank you, Trudy, and thanks to the San Francisco Autism Society of America. I've been really looking forward to this. This is my first webinar. You're going to have to excuse me because I have a little bit of a cold. My son seems to get me sick every other week, and that's where I am right now. Can everybody see my screen right now?
Let's see. No.
How about
yep.
Okay, good.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I figured it would be helpful first. Let's talk about who this presentation is geared for. It's geared for individuals who are diagnosed with Asperger syndrome, what I call the higher verbal end of the autism spectrum, and those who fall into the gray area, which typically we refer to as PDD and OS, or I refer to as having one toe in the spectrum, one foot in the spectrum, one leg in the spectrum. The reason for this is because that has been the majority of my professional experience. I don't really have experience working with individuals who need more help with pragmatic language and such. That being said, all the information in here can be modified to meet diverse cognitive needs, language needs, and so on. So I just wanted to get that out there. Few things I'd like you to take from today. So number one is understand the importance of teaching this information comprehensively through a social learning perspective, and I'll explain what that means in a little bit. Understand what topics need to be covered, and describe 2 strategies to increase socially appropriate behaviors and address problematic behaviors pertaining to these topics. Before I tell you about myself, I want to tell you a little bit how I got interested in this topic. This was never really of an area of interest for me. And about, I guess it was 13 years ago or so, I was working at a school. Actually, I work there now again at a different campus called the Yale School in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And at the time, the first generation of kids who were really diagnosed correctly in early childhood were coming up. And the public schools in our area at the time, they didn't know what to do with all these kids, so they started sending them out of district. So the population I was working with at Yale was first kids with more of a behavioral profile. They were pretty street smart kids. And then the population started to shift over to kids, diagnosed with Asperger's and higher verbal ASD. And one of the things that I started to notice, I'm a school social worker by training. One of the things that I started to notice that the things that teachers were bringing to me had shifted drastically. So before, whereas things like, maybe this kid's not wearing deodorant or he's annoying this girl, those kind of things, the tone of things changed to things such as, the student staring at my chest the whole class period, it's making me uncomfortable. Or the student's walking around with an erection and he's completely clueless and everybody's laughing at him. So it really kind of got me interested in why are these kind of behaviors happening, what have they not learned, and why. So I began to ask some of my professional colleagues about it, who had been in the field longer than I have, and they all said the same thing to me, that they hear the same things, but they don't really have an answer. So jump ahead a few years later, I was working at another school, and what I found was that the students I was working with, they had, I guess, what you call health or family life class in school, and they really were learning, they didn't seem to be learning from it. And again, I couldn't understand why that was if they had this class and had a really strong teacher. So I again asked some of my professional colleagues, and again, they said the same thing. We also find that, the kids we work with lack this information, and we don't know why they're not picking it up. So that's really kind of what got me interested in this. And I started to learn all I could. I did a bunch of training with a woman whose name is Isabel Hinault. Some of you might have heard of. She is a sexologist in Montreal and is wonderful. If you ever have the opportunity to see her, she's a lot of fun to see present. And she's really kind of the person in the world who's most known for specializing in sexuality and Asperger's and higher verbal ASD. So a little bit about myself real quick. So I'm a licensed social worker. I also have the credential of certified autism specialist. I've spent the majority of my career as a school clinician at schools for kids with Asperger's and ASD. I have a private practice called Center for ADHD, which is located right outside of Philadelphia. The reason, real quick, I call it Center for ADHD is because there's about 2 Center for Autisms in the Philadelphia area, so that's why. And I also created and facilitate what's called the Guy Stuff program, which is a course that I teach here with a co-facilitator who's a guy I've worked with forever. He's a middle school special ed teacher. And you're welcome to check out my website after the presentation, which is right up there. Okay. So I'd like you to think about which of these statements are true. Okay, so number 1, the world is a much more dangerous place today than when we were all growing up. 2, sex education can provoke kids to explore sex before they're ready. And 3, given their social, emotional immaturity, kids diagnosed with ADHD, Asperger's, ASD should learn about puberty and sexuality education at a later age when they are more mature. So if you said none of those statements are true, you're correct. There's actually no data that proves that the world is any more dangerous today than 30 years ago. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it's safer because we have more awareness now of things. We also know that parents communicating with their children about sexuality and reproductive health has been proven to delay sexual activity and increase the use of prevention. And the last part is that social and emotional immaturity does not mean that one's hormones are delayed. So I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the language I use. So I don't use the term social skills, really. I use the term social cognitive skills. And that's a term I learned from Michelle Garcia Winner, who some of you have probably heard of. She was a creator of social thinking. And I was lucky enough to do a training program at the Social Thinking Clinic in California years ago. So social cognitive skills really is defined as one's ability to think in a social context and apply skills relevant to the situation. It's a slow and long process, and really the way it's different than teaching social skills is because if we teach social skills without teaching context, it's basically we're teaching then scripted behaviors. And with teaching social cognitive skills, it needs to be taught over a long period of time with increasing depth. And it's not something that you can teach by teaching a new concept every week. So one week is not, eye contact, another week's not turn taking. It's teaching how to think in a social context. Another term I use is social learning challenges. So, a lot of times we talk about that people on the spectrum, they will sometimes say they have poor social skills. And social learning challenges, I think, is a better term because it really describes what happens developmentally is that people on the spectrum, they don't pick up social information intuitively to varying degrees. It also defines what are learning gaps in information that society expects us to know. And one of the things that I really heard from that I really liked pertaining to all this from a guy out of New York whose name is Peter Gerhardt is he has a saying that sexual behavior is social behavior. Okay. And one of the things we know is that somebody's social competency does not improve simply by being around peers with more developed social skills because people don't pick up social information intuitively. One's language can improve by being around peers with stronger language, but your social cognitive skills do not improve just by being around others with stronger social cognitive skills. Another term really important to this topic is called context blindness. That term came from a guy whose name is Peter Vermeulen, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Belgium. And what that is, it's taking into account that people on the spectrum do not always take into account the context of the situation, so the who, what, where, when, why. And if you think about it, if you lack an understanding of context, it's difficult to understand what is and isn't socially appropriate. Okay. The next term is what is called sexuality and relationship education. That term was created by a woman whose name is Davida Hartman. She's somebody who specializes in autism in Ireland, and she defines it as comprehensive education pertaining to topics around puberty, sexuality, and relationships. I would also add into that definition, I'd say age-appropriate education as well. So here's what sexuality and relationship education is not. It's not teaching about sexual acts, it is not encouraging sexual behavior dating, and is not fear-based education. And what I mean by fear-based education, some of you are probably familiar, or a lot of you are probably familiar with the DARE model that came out in the 80s, where, just kind of teaching that drugs are bad and didn't kind of teach the reason why people enjoy drugs. So we know that trying to scare people is not an effective way to communicate a message always. Okay. So why do individuals with ASD, and just for the sake of language here, I'm going to refer to kind of the population that this presentation is geared towards. I'm just going to use the term ASD. So why do they need to be taught sexuality and relationship education from a social learning perspective? Well, number one is because they have limited opportunities for normative social and what's called sociosexual experiences, meaning when their peers, start getting involved in, having romantic relationships and kind of navigating all that, they tend to not be a part of that, both because socially they're not there and maturity-wise they're not there. As we talked about before, people with ASD, they don't pick up social information intuitively. There is also, I've found, a tremendous lack of clarity and discomfort around whom should be addressing these topics. Many individuals on the spectrum, they don't know what to ask, or whom they should be asking, even though they have questions. And one of the most significant things I found is that, particularly with the older guys, that they believe they know much more than they actually do. So when I teach my Guy Stuff course, one of the things that we do is we assess how much information everyone has, all the students have, when we start. And what we usually find is that they have very little information. And this has nothing to do with their cognitive ability. It's, again, this lack of just being able to retain this information or learn it in a way that works for their learning style. Okay. So I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the puberty response for boys on the spectrum. There's not one, there's several I've found in my experience. One, and this could be applicable for girls as well, this first one in particular, fear and anxiety about it because it's change that they can't control and symbolizes that they're getting older. One of the things that Michelle Garcia-Winter talks about is she's had many clients who have shaved all their body hair from the neck down because it bothered them. And I've worked with guys, college age guys who are they will shave their chest hair. They will only wear shirts where you can't see any chest hair because it really bothers them because it's a sign that they're an adult to them. That's what it's symbolic of to them. I find a lot of kids become more dysregulated. What I tend to see a lot is around 5th grade or 6th grade, typically when puberty starts, a lot become more dysregulated, and then they tend to quiet down around age 14, 8th grade, where some, they become more regulated and more socially motivated. A lot think of it scientifically and are fine with it. And then there's a group that will feel so overwhelmed and confused by their sexual thoughts and feelings that they attempt to disconnect from it. And this is often misinterpreted as being asexual. So when I first got into the field, one of the things that was said a lot was, well, people, with autism are asexual. And I think that's where that idea came from this group of individuals who just doesn't want to deal with this because it's too overwhelming for them. So some important pieces about sexual development in the ASD population. A lot of individuals do not discover masturbation until later or understand the concept of masturbating to ejaculation. Some are actually fearful of ejaculation. I see that frequently. Some do not discover pornography until much later, whereas the average age now, from the last time I read statistics, the average age of when kids discover pornography now is about 11. We know that individuals on the spectrum are much more likely to identify as bisexual, pansexual, gay, or lesbian. I do hear a lot of kids using the term pansexual, which, if you're not familiar with, it means that you're attracted to everything. So interestingly, I worked with a guy who, I guess he was 21 at the time, and when I asked him how he identified, he said, I identify as pansexual with an orientation towards masculine individuals. So I said, what does that mean? He said, I don't really care if they're male or female, I just care that they're masculine. Okay. Another thing that we know is that a lot of individuals on the spectrum, there's a propensity to develop fetish type of interest or fixate on certain features. So I'm sure some of you have heard of cosplay, which is popular in the ASD community. There's a sexual component to that. I've seen a lot with foot fetishes, those types of things. I've also seen individuals who kind of fixate on women who have extremely large breasts, or men, or they've seen men in pornography who have very large penises, and that kind of becomes their point that they're fixated on. So if you think about it, it's kind of consistent with what we know, that many individuals on the spectrum, they tend to have a narrow range of interests and also become fixated on things. One of the things I tend to see in young adults is that because of this, they have a tendency to be very unrealistic about who their potential partners are. So I'll often see, guys who, or older guys who, might have some dating prospects, particularly if they, have a peer group or part of a community when they're around other young adults on the spectrum, but they have no interest in dating other individuals on the spectrum. They just are interested in, somebody who they go to school with who, has high social status, so with a cheerleader type or, things like that. And a lot of times what I find is that we have to teach who is a realistic, who is realistic in terms of your dating pool and who is not, because of your social status. And I do think it's important that we teach individuals on the spectrum the concept of social hierarchy and social status, because it is real. And if we don't teach it, then we're not really teaching them reality. One of the things that we definitely know is people on the spectrum can be much more fluid in gender identity. Some of you have probably heard there's a lot of information coming out now about the amount of individuals, particularly with Asperger's, who identify as transgender, or what's called a non-binary gender. A lot of the adults I see, what I found is a lot of them do not have sexual experiences until they're much older. Many of them have not had any sexual experiences at all. And another part that we know from research is that individuals on the spectrum, when they're sexually active, are less likely to use contraception. And I think the most significant part about this that we should talk about is there's a tendency to be attracted to younger people, because many individuals, they feel younger than their chronological age, and what's called their psychosexual development is delayed. So I'll give you an example real quick. I'm working right now with a 19-year-old, and last year when he was a senior in high school, started an online relationship with a 14-year-old girl. And his parents were very upset with him, and they ended this right away, and he couldn't understand why. It was not appropriate for him to be speaking to a girl in middle school when he was in 12th grade. Because for him internally, that's how old he feels, so that's who he's drawn towards. Okay, so there's a lot of misconceptions that exist about puberty and sexuality within the ASD population. So some of the things that I've heard before are, he's not interested in that stuff. And what I have to tell mom sometimes is just because he doesn't talk about it doesn't mean that he's not interested in it. I'm working with one guy who's, I guess he's 15 now, and expressed an interest in a girl in school this year and asked her out, and his mother was shocked by it. She said, well, I never thought that he would be interested in anybody. And I said, well, he has hormones, he's developing naturally, so of course he's going to have an interest. Sometimes people assume that kids are too immature to learn this information. Sometimes I think there's a little bit of a denial. I've heard people say, he just needs to focus on making friends and not be thinking about getting a boyfriend or girlfriend. Well, that's also not realistic, because we're denying the fact that they are developing naturally and they have the same interests and urges as their typically developing peers. And the question that I hear the most, and I've heard from other people who speak on this topic, is, my son wants to get a girlfriend. How can I help him find one? And my answer to that is always, does he have friends? And usually the parent will say no. And I say, okay, well, until he gets really good at this friendship thing and have a group of male friends that he can hang out with and get together with socially, a girlfriend is not in the picture. So I'm working with a 22-year-old right now, a guy with Asperger's who is a senior in college, and I've known him since he was 16, and he's been fixated on the cheerleaders in school throughout high school, and got into some trouble as a result. And when he got to college, he's been fixated on the girls who he finds more attractive and has made them uncomfortable. And one of the things he said to me when I started working with him earlier this year was, I need to have a girlfriend before I graduate college. And I said to him, and his parents supported me on this, I said, that is not going to happen. So, because until you get really good at this friend thing, and he's never gotten together socially with anybody in college in 4 years he's been there, I said, until you focus on this and begin to focus more of your attention on forming friendships with guys, there's not going to be a girlfriend anytime in the near future. And it took him a while, but he finally accepted that. So I know that might sound a little bit harsh to some, but again, I think we have to be realistic. And if somebody is going to enter into a romantic relationship, they're not going to be able to navigate that unless they have an understanding of friendships and how friendships evolve and how emotional intimacy developed between friends as well. So I thought this was important to show because, if we look at individuals on the spectrum, developmentally they can be all over the place. So said, here's a sample developmental chart of a 12-year-old diagnosed with ADHD and Asperger's. So, physically we see that, he's, more at 14 than at 12. Intellectually, he's around age 18. And socially and emotionally, he's around age 9. So what happens when an individual, they're physically, developmentally on target or above and intellectually? Well, they tend to be able to, articulate themselves relatively well, and again, have the same urges and hormones as their typically developing peers. But socially and emotionally, they're much younger. And one of the things we know is that our society judges us based on our physical appearance. And what I mean by that is, if somebody has Down syndrome, people are going to be empathetic and understanding with them because they have a noticeable difference. Whereas if somebody on the spectrum, and I put in quotes, looks neurotypical, people are not going to be understanding with them because there is an expectation that, you should know better because of the way you look, or you should know better because of how old you look physically. So just real quick, I wanted to talk about the program I designed. Guy Stuff is based on the social thinking concepts and language, as well as the work of Dr. Isabel Hinault, who I mentioned, and Davida Hartman. One of the things I think is really important, I've seen a lot of parents will say, what book on puberty should I get for my son? And my answer is always, don't get them a book, because this generation of kids does not read books that are not of interest to them. Not to mention that a lot of individuals with ASD are very visual learners, and most books on this topic are very text-heavy and don't have enough illustrations. And the most important part, I think, is how do kids learn today when they want to learn something on their own? They go on YouTube. So the program is very heavy in videos, and I'm going to show you pieces of some. And they actually all come from YouTube, except for one video called Mike's Crush that was created by my colleague Nancy Noel, and her business is called Social Signals. I definitely recommend it to check it out. Nancy also works with individuals with intellectual disabilities, and it's a really wonderful video. And the Guy Stuff curriculum, like I mentioned, was designed by myself and my co-facilitator, Stephen. So getting into a little more language, we talk about hidden rules. Some of you may have heard that referred to as a hidden curriculum, same exact thing. So they are social expectations that are not taught, but assumed will be picked up intuitively. And people with social learning challenges such as ASD need to be taught hidden rules, and hidden rules also increase with age as social expectations increase. So one of the things when I do my parent presentation for Guy Stuff, I want to mention also there's always a parent session, and in the 5th grade and middle school programs, the fathers or a male role model participates as well. Because we want to help them feel more comfortable discussing, these topics. So one of the things I always ask parents when I do the parent session is who teaches boys these hidden rules during puberty, such as urinal etiquette, such as don't adjust yourself in public, hide it when you have an erection, don't stare at someone's chest or genital area, and don't leave any evidence if you masturbate. And the answer most of the time is no. Just recently I had one person, it's an adult who self-identified as being on the spectrum, told me that his father actually taught him this. But in my experience, nobody teaches kids this because we don't think about it. And as men, we take it for granted because we picked up this information intuitively. So this is a video I wanted to show, I'm just going to show part of, about urinal etiquette. Because again, one of the things that I've frequently seen and heard about is many individuals on the spectrum, because they have sensory issues and they are fearful of getting wet when they urinate at a urinal, they have a tendency to pull down their pants and underwear all the way, and that's not what's expected at a urinal. So it's one thing if you're 5 years old and do that, it is not okay when you're 15 years old. So we really have to make sure our kids are understanding public bathroom etiquette. And I would encourage everyone, I know that sometimes moms are fearful of letting their sons go into public bathrooms on their own. And realistically, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that when sexual assaults happen, okay, it's very rare that they happen somewhere like a Target bathroom, or when sexual abuse occurs, it's usually somebody who's well known to the child and has easy access to them. Random kind of instances like public bathrooms, it's very rare. So it's really important that we teach kids how to be socially appropriate in bathrooms. So I want to show this video.
There are 5 urinals in your lavatory. If no one is there, you can choose any one you want, with the exception of 5. If there is someone there, you just need to follow these simple rules. If someone is at number 3, then you should go to number 1. If someone is at number 1, you should go to 3. If someone is at 5, you should go to 1. If someone is at 1 and 3, you should go to 5. Therefore, if 1 and 5 are taken, then 3 should be used. If someone is at 2, you go to 4. If someone is at 4, you go to 2. Those are the easy ones. What happens if all of the even or odd spots are already taken? Here's some examples. If all of the odds are taken, you can use 2 but not 4. If all of the evens are occupied, you can use 1 but not 5, and certainly not 3. If no pattern has been set and odds and evens are being used, it gets even more difficult. If 1, 2, and 4 are being used, you should use 3. But if the reverse is being used, 2, 4, and 5, you should use 1. 1, 4, and 5 use 2. 3 and 4 use 1. 1 and 2 use...
So the video gets a little silly, as you see, but the point is that there's, an expected etiquette when you're at a urinal, and you need to know that, otherwise you're going to make people uncomfortable. And we do teach this in the program. So one of the ways that we teach context is through the language we use. So some of the things we say are all guys your age, some guys your age, and not okay for your age, because this is a way of teaching social expectations. So for instance, not taking care of your body is not okay for your age. And we always kind of explain why, and I would encourage you as parents to do this, because so number one, as we get older, people expect us to do a better job of taking care of our body. If we don't, people are going to have uncomfortable thoughts about us. They may not treat us well, and they may not want to be around us. And we know that many individuals on the spectrum struggle with hygiene. So one of the, mentioning again how important it is to have visuals, what I did here was I took this picture of a student, and I used a free app called Sketch, which you can download for Windows, and added some text to it so we can really highlight kind of the features of what's expected. So all guys your age are expected to do this every day. Okay. And this is a really big one, because this is actually one of the things that I have to deal with the most, because parents tend to get emails about this from school, and obviously this is not a comfortable topic for teachers to deal with, and I don't think they should have to either. And sometimes I've seen teachers try to push it on the nurse, and a lot of school nurses are not comfortable dealing with this, which I totally understand. So this is all guys my age are expected to hide an erection. Oh, sorry about that.
How to hide
Oh, there it goes.
erection in school. It's great to know the thing is working, but getting an erection in school can be really embarrassing. You will need an oversized shirt, sweatshirt or t-shirt, a book bag with long straps, and baggy jeans or khakis. Step 1. If erections in school have become a daily problem, buy long button shirts that you can wear outside your jeans, or wear oversized sweatshirts and tees. Step 2. Always have a book bag with extra long straps with you, one that won't look odd when it's slung over one shoulder so it hangs down low in front. This will be a lifesaver when class ends and you have to jump out of your seat. Step 3. Wear baggy jeans or khakis. When your little buddy jumps to attention at an inopportune time, you can slip your hands in your pockets and casually push the pants material away from your groin, making the bulge less noticeable. Ejaculating more often can solve a spontaneous erection problem. Step 4. Once you've done your best to camouflage the problem, it's time to get rid of it altogether. Doing a complicated math problem in your head often works, since it forces you to focus on something else. Step 5. Tense your quadriceps, the muscles in front of your legs. This redirects the blood flow away from Mr. Happy, taking the wind out of his sails, so to speak. Step 6. Now pinch yourself. Not in an Aren't I a lucky kind of way, but to bring tears to your eyes. Pain should do the trick. Step 7. If all else fails, walk around on the heels of your feet. This has worked for many a hormonally charged young man. And if it doesn't, you'll look so dorky that no one will notice your budding neck.
So I wanted to say about that, I always tell kids, forget about the pinching part, don't do that. One of the things that I teach parents is I say, beginning in 5th grade, we need to get kids out of sweatpants and start wearing jeans or, pants that, are not as revealing, we'll say. Because realistically, for when a lot of boys start puberty, their genitals grow, and when you have an erection, it becomes much more noticeable than before you started puberty. And something that parents will say to me a lot is, well, my son has sensory issues, he doesn't like jeans and so on, and all he'll wear is track pants. And what I tell them is go to the store with him, and it doesn't matter if he doesn't like going to the store, he's at an age he needs to start being involved in his clothes shopping, and try on some different pants and see what works for him. And the bottom line is, for me, that other people shouldn't have to feel uncomfortable because of your son's sensory issues. And I know that might sound a little harsh, but think about it. This is something that really could make people uncomfortable, and it's also socially inappropriate as well. So when we teach about puberty, we teach it as a biological process. We want to make everything about science, because I find that takes the anxiety out of this for a lot of kids, because when we teach a program, a lot of kids are really anxious about participating. The other thing is, a lot of puberty education materials make puberty sound weird and scary, so they'll say things, strange changes are going to happen to your body. And like I mentioned before, most of them are too text-heavy and not visual enough for the ASD learner. So this is something called a Tanner scale, which is something doctors use to understand puberty. So, it's a graphic we show. We also show one for girls as well. Interestingly, I find with the middle school program, the kids, and even the high school program, the kids tend to be more interested in female anatomy, even though they don't understand their own. Okay. And this is a video I just want to show a piece of. This is from a website called amaze.org, and they have wonderful videos on a variety of topics. They just actually came out this year. One of my issues with this is that they use slang a little too much for my comfort level. And one of the things that I always teach is that you need to use the scientific terms for things, okay, and not use slang, because that's what's appropriate. And the only time it is ever okay to use slang is when you are with, one friend or a few friends, and there are no adults around. So that means it's never okay in school, and that's the only time it's ever okay to use slang. Because if we want our kids to learn how to be socially appropriate, if you don't learn how to use slang and you don't learn how to use the language of your generation, you're going to sound overly formal. So this is a video just about puberty.
Okay, guys, listen. All boys go through a changing process called puberty. There are many physical, emotional, and social changes of puberty, and it generally takes 5 to 7 years for all the changes to be complete. The changes of puberty happen at different times for each person, and there's no right time for these changes to occur. For boys, it generally starts between the ages of 11 to 15. Okay, so the most noticeable physical changes of puberty for boys include getting facial hair, having frequent and at times spontaneous erections, when the penis fills with blood and gets bigger, making sperm, which, when mixed with other fluids, creates semen, which is about a teaspoon of whitish fluid that can be ejaculated out of the penis, possibly experiencing wet dreams, meaning ejaculating semen while sleeping, normal if it does happen, and normal if it doesn't, and possibly experimenting with masturbation, touching yourself for pleasure. Again, normal if you do, and normal if you don't. Okay, guys, here are some additional physical changes of puberty. A growth spurt, during which boys become taller, their shoulders become broader, and their whole body grows larger. Their genitals are growing in size, as their voice is deepening.
How you doing?
Occasional acne. And some slight breast growth is possible as a result of all those hormones, which usually resolves on its own. Growing pubic hair around the genitals and hair under the arms. and sweat may now have a strong odor. Why? The purpose of puberty is to allow the body to...
So one of the things that you'll notice is a lot of the videos I use are animation, and there's a reason for that, because most of the kids I work with prefer animation to, movies, and a lot of them are into Japanese anime and such. The other thing that I use with videos is, so for instance, I'll show videos about, brushing your teeth correctly. And putting on deodorant and such. And luckily, I've been able to find enough videos on YouTube of boys, around their age doing this. Why these kids put a video of brushing their teeth on YouTube, I don't know, but I'm glad it's there. Because I want them to see kids their age doing these hygiene tests. I think that's more meaningful than watching, a doctor saying, you need to brush your teeth so you don't get cavities type of thing. So one of the things we know is that many individuals on the spectrum, they have trouble identifying their feelings. And one of the things I find is when they reach puberty, they have tremendous difficulty being able to discern between romantic thoughts and sexual thoughts. So we really want to break that down very clearly for them. So some of the language I use is romantic thoughts, romantic feelings, sexual thoughts and sexual feelings. The other thing I will tell you, I always use gender-neutral language. So I will never say, when you get a girlfriend, or, if you like girls, I'll say if you like somebody, or one day when you have a girlfriend or boyfriend. Because we don't want to assume that anybody is heterosexual. I think that's really important. I'll say out of the kids who I work with, if you ask them how they identify, I'd say I have a portion of kids who, even in middle school, identify as gay. Most of the kids I'd see, I would say, identify as bisexual or pansexual, and that could be temporary. And then, of course, some identify as heterosexual. But really, most of the kids on the spectrum I see identify as bisexual. So we define romantic thoughts as emotional attraction. It's when you like somebody and really want to get to know them more. I also talk about how it's normal we talk about how it's normal to have what's called a man crush. So when you might have romantic feelings for another guy who's your age or who's a little older. And we talk about how that is different than being sexually attracted to somebody. So one of the things that I've found is a lot of times with guys in high school age, they can get really fixated on certain individuals, like I mentioned, but because they also have difficulty understanding the context of relationships, they begin to think that they are in love when really they're sexually attracted to somebody. I recently spoke with a dad of a 15-year-old who's having lots of issues. His son is, friending, I guess, every, woman on Instagram he can find and saying, you're beautiful, you're hot, things like that, and he doesn't even know them. And, he said that he has been in love with different girls in school, most of whom he hasn't even talked to. So, again, this is why we need to really clarify this. And I wanted to, and I think this video in particular is really important to show. And, again, this is from amaze.org. You can find it on their website.
Love is a very strong feeling that people can feel for a variety of others, including family members and people to whom they're attracted to romantically and sexually. People cannot control who they have feelings of love for, just as they cannot control who they find romantically and sexually attractive. But people can make decisions about their behaviors, including if and how they show their feelings. There are lots of ways that a person can show their love for another person, including hugging, kissing, doing nice things for them, and telling them that you love them. When someone cares deeply about another person and also feels attracted to that person, they may be feeling romantic love. Some people choose to be sexually intimate with the person they feel romantic love for, but having sex does not always mean two people feel romantic love for each other. Sometimes people say they are in love when they have strong romantic feelings of attraction for another person. The feeling of being in love can cause a person's palms to get sweaty. They might feel butterflies in their stomach. Their pulse might get quicker, and they might feel nervous and/or excited. It's great when the feeling of being in love is mutual, but if the feelings are not mutual, that can be hard to handle. Unfortunately, this happens to most people sometime in their lives. But don't worry. Another person will eventually come along who will be interested in you, like you are in them. Sometimes a person falls in love with someone who may say they love them back, but makes them feel badly about themselves or their relationship. This may not be healthy love. Love should never be used as an excuse for treating another person disrespectfully. People who have a real and healthy love treat each other with kindness and respect.
So one of the things I wanted to mention is that I have worked with a number of guys, particularly when I worked in high school, who get into relationships with girls, and they tend to get into relationships where they are not always treated very well, or the girl happens, because of her own insecurities, happens to be very controlling, and they tend to tolerate whatever just because it's so important for them to have a girlfriend. So last year, I was working with a guy in college who had his first girlfriend, and she was incredibly controlling of him. And when I tried to, teach him, why this might not be healthy in terms of kind of the power differentiation in their relationship, he really didn't want to hear that, because just having a girlfriend to him was more important than actually what, if he felt good about himself as a result of it. So that's something that's really common. I will also say I've seen situations with guys who might have a girlfriend or meet a girl, and the girl is the one who is sexually assertive, and they have a tendency to feel like they have to go along with whatever a girl wants because you can't say no. We know that in the ASD community that's a huge problem with girls. I've heard of lots of girls in high school, or young women meeting guys in their 40s because they're giving them attention. And one of the things we really have to teach is self-advocacy skills. So it's okay to speak up for what you need, and it's certainly okay to say no and to say you're uncomfortable. So I want to move on to talking about hygiene. Part of the reason, besides they have difficulty with perspective taking, of understanding, other people's thoughts and feelings, one of the reasons I think people on the spectrum struggle with hygiene is because they're executive functioning deficits. So the way we handle this, we use some strategies to make things very visual. So I'm going to show you a visual timeline that I create with kids. And one of the things I think is really important to do is we want to move our kids away from being what's called prompt dependent to being independent. Because I found the more an individual on the spectrum is prompt dependent, the more they are over dependent on their parents. And maybe this is just my experience, but I found that over dependency increases as individuals get older if they don't learn how to be independent, and if their parents don't kind of push them into being more independent, which they are often resistant to. I have a saying that I teach parents that individuals with Asperger's and higher verbal ASD, they have a tendency to be kids when it's convenient for them, and they have a tendency to be adults when it's convenient for them. And what we need to teach them is, the concept of you can't have your cake and eat it too. So if you want certain privileges and certain freedoms, well, then you're also going to have to take on more responsibilities. And one of the things I'm sure, as we all know, is that many individuals on the spectrum, they don't want to do tasks that they find boring to them. And hygiene might be one of those things. So, as I'm sure some of you, like myself, when my son was younger, have made lists of things our kids are supposed to do. So the reason lists don't work for most people with ASD is because they're not visual. So again, if you have a visual learner who struggles with what's called their nonverbal working memory, the best way to help them develop their nonverbal working memory, which is essentially the ability to picture yourself doing something in the future, is to use a visual aid, such as this. So this is, this is actually the nighttime routine of one of my guys that I work with. So as you'll see, we put everything in a sequence of what he's supposed to be doing at what time. And the reason there's an analog clock is because you cannot learn to conceptualize time using digital clocks or a cell phone. The way we learn to feel time as a concrete concept is through using analog clocks. And there's more to it than that, but that's a presentation for another day. So this is kind of his nighttime routine, and what I taught his parents to help him become less prompt dependent, more independent, is instead of telling him every step of the way, so take your medicine, take a shower, hang your towel up, is, Evan, go look at the timeline. Are you on the timeline right now? And that way he has to think about for himself if he's ahead of schedule, he's behind schedule, he's on schedule, and if he's done these tasks, and that's how you learn to develop independence. Okay. The other thing we know is that many individuals on the spectrum, they have difficulty using past experiences and applying them to the future. So one of some of the language I use is same but different. And I learned that from a woman named Sarah Ward, who I trained with for executive function skill work. If you ever have an opportunity to see her, she's amazing. And I think the work she's doing is really revolutionizing the executive function field. And her website is efpractice.com, so executivefunctionpractice.com. I do know for those of you in the San Francisco area, she comes out there very regularly. So here I ask kids, I say, how is getting ready for school and getting ready for bed the same but different? And what I'm asking them to do is look at the different features so they can think about them think about that for themselves. Another concept we need to teach is media literacy. So if you are a literal learner, you have trouble differentiating between what is fact, what is opinion, what is supposed to be funny. And think about how much our kids are on YouTube, And one of the things is they really can't distinguish on YouTube between what is meant to be funny and what is meant to be serious. And they certainly can't distinguish what is factual and what is opinion. And there's a tremendous amount of inaccurate and irresponsible information online that can be very confusing for them. One of the core social learning challenges of ASD is difficulty understanding other people's sense of humor and sarcasm, and learning how to not interpret things literally, how to, being able to understand nuances. So we really have to teach how to discern between scientific, fact-based information and inaccurate information, opinions, and facts. And I encourage everyone to, sit down at a computer with your kids or your students and show them the difference between the two. So one of the things for that is if you type in to YouTube how to get a girlfriend, okay, this is the #1 video that comes up. So there's about 7 million hits on it, or 8 million. And one of the things is this: have a clear list of what you want in a girlfriend. Well, if you have trouble with perspective taking, also called theory of mind, of understanding other people's thoughts, feelings, and intentions, and if you are a literal learner, you're going to look at this and think, okay, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, and whatever I have on this list, then therefore that's what I should be looking for a girlfriend, or that's what I'm entitled to. So I wanted to show this because I think it's just really important, given that this is the #1 video on YouTube, and lots of kids type into YouTube, how do I get a girlfriend?
Second tip, have a clear list of what you want in your ideal woman. This is, of course, aesthetic attributes as well as what you're looking for in regards to her character. What is your ideal woman? Now, a lot of guys, they say that they feel that if they have a list of what they want in a girl, it might cut off their options. So they want to keep an open mind. However, an open mind can often translate to women as, I'll take whatever I can get. So you have to be.
So think about just with what she said right there, this idea. She doesn't talk about reciprocity or the idea that somebody has to be interested in you, right? It's about make a list to get what you want. And again, if you learn literally, you're going to take that literally and think that that's realistic. One of the other things that we teach is the idea of how male and female bodies are perpetuated by the media. And this picture is actually somebody who they photoshopped to show the ideal body in different countries. I will tell you, I've seen now 2 guys who have become very fixated on their appearance. One of the guys I work with would, go into the bathroom in school last year and start doing, push-ups on the bathroom floor. He became very obsessed with muscles. Another guy I see, an older guy, is this kind of hulking guy with giant muscles, and feels, very insecure about himself, and still, it's almost like what people will call body dysmorphic disorder. Because this is kind of their fixation, so we need to teach how the media tells us, what should be attractive or what's ideal for both men and women. I think that's important. This is another program I do teaching about social media and internet. So due to their lack of understanding of context, many individuals on the spectrum, they don't understand what and how much information is appropriate to share online. So this graphic shows, for instance, that Twitter and Facebook is not personal at all. You're just putting information out there, whereas talking one-on-one to somebody is very intimate. So I work with a guy who's an adult, and he kind of thrives off of, getting feedback on Facebook. And he interpreted when he posts something and gets feedback on Facebook as that these were people who were his friends and spend a lot of time thinking about what he posts. And I had to explain to him, the superficial nature of Facebook and how little effort it takes to click on like for something. And he's gotten a lot better with it since then and understands that, somebody who you're friends with on Facebook, because they hit like on something, does not mean that they're your friend. They're somebody you're Facebook friends with. Okay. So sexual orientation, again, we use gender-neutral language and just really kind of talk about what these different terms mean. It's a really nice video also from amaze.org. I'm not going to show just for the sake of time. So I want to move on to dealing with what we call the uncomfortable stuff. So one of the things I always say is that if your child's behaviors make you uncomfortable or make other people uncomfortable, they need to be addressed as soon as possible. Because teaching social appropriateness is teaching accountability. And if you take anything from this, that's really what I want you to remember, that number 2. And the other thing, I find a lot of parents sometimes are worried about hurting their kids' feelings. And I explain to them, if you worry about hurting their feelings, you can't teach social expectations. So the other day, with a 19-year-old I'm working with, the mother and father, we were meeting together, and they started getting into it because the father said to the mother, "You're always criticizing him." And the mother said, when I tell him to use a fork at the dining room table and don't reach your hand into a bowl, that's not criticizing him, that's teaching him how to be socially appropriate. And the father said, "Well, you do that all the time." And I stopped them and I said, "And that's what she needs to do, and you need to do as well, because if he does that in your house, then he's going to be doing it outside the house." One of the other things I just want to backtrack real quick, I find that with many kids on the spectrum around nudity at home, there's kind of 2 things. Either 1, they're completely oblivious to the idea of privacy, or 2, they're very modest. And when I have parents tell me that, well, he's okay walking around naked, at home or getting out of the shower, I tell them, you need to teach him to put a towel on, and not get changed with his bedroom door open, because he needs to understand that that's not socially appropriate anymore, and he needs to understand the concept of privacy as well. And one of the things I also tell parents is, if you're letting him walk around the house without clothes on like that, then, and I usually find this with younger kids, I say, when he, and he started puberty, I said, he's going to think it's okay to masturbate with, in front of other people, because he doesn't understand the difference between, a sense of privacy or not. So that's something we really need to instill. This is a video from the show Roseanne I really like. It talks about masturbation. I find that people really like this one, so I wanted to show this clip.
Don't mind me. I was just gonna get something. Hey, Deej. I think that you and me need to talk about some stuff. I'm just not. It's just what I'm trying to say is, look, is there anything you feel like asking me about?
No.
Good. Good. Very good. Okay, look, DJ. Look, buddy, I know you're really embarrassed right now. I just want you to know that what you've been doing, it's just a part of growing up.
So you're proud of me?
Well, yeah, but not for this. The point is, I'm not upset with you. This is something that everybody does.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
much do you do it?
The funny thing about this is that even though it's okay and everybody does it, there's nothing wrong with it. Nobody ever talks about it.
So the reason I like showing that video is because it teaches context, you know, that masturbation is okay, but it's not something that people talk about openly. Also with things like this, you know, and with the nudity thing, I teach rules. So for instance, with masturbation, it is either done in the bathroom with the door locked or in your room with the door closed when you know for sure nobody's coming in. I say it is never to be done in school, in your living room, so on. I've had a lot of kids who do masturbate in school, and you know, I say that needs to stop immediately. You know, I've had teachers complain about kids leaving class for this. You know, one of the other things that can be really difficult to deal with is because many individuals on the spectrum have trouble with delayed gratification or waiting for things. When they start to get sexual urges, you know, they feel that they need to experience sex immediately. And what we have to teach them, especially at younger ages, is that's not something that's going to happen for a very long time to come. And they don't like that, but it's important for them to hear that. The other thing I'll just say on this topic real quick, I do find that those who have not discovered masturbation, I definitely see a propensity to become very sexually preoccupied. And I see that frequently. And then once they discover masturbation, they tend to, you know, things tend to get better with that, and they're not so preoccupied. So really, one of the things I didn't get into is what's called the ILAF model of social cognition, which you can read about on the Social Thinking website, which is socialthinking.com. And that's really the foundation of how I base my work. And it's what it is, real quick, is it's the foundational skills that people who have social learning challenges don't develop intuitively. And one of the most important ones in that is perspective taking. So what I say is we need to teach perspective taking skills as they pertain to sexuality and relationship education. And this education needs to be done within the context of understanding other people's thoughts, feelings, and intentions, but also understanding how you come across to other people. So there's some examples right here of kind of the language we use, so I'm just going to read the one. So it's expected at your age that when you're getting dressed or in the shower, you close the door. Sorry for the typo there. You should want to have some privacy because your kids your age need some privacy. Okay. Teaching self-advocacy skills. I always encourage parents, I say, help your son identify a trusted adult, preferably one of the same gender, whom they can ask if they have questions or concerns. And, you know, we have to teach the language around self-advocacy. So saying no, asking for help, asking for clarification. And also knowing how to initiate conversations. So one of the things I teach parents is, you know, have a conversation with kids and explain to them if they have questions about, you know, these topics, define a time that would be good to ask you. Because sometimes again, because they lack an understanding of context, they might ask at inappropriate times. So what I do during our our dad-son session is, you know, I have them define, you know, come up with a time where they can talk about this stuff, you know, when other people aren't going to be around. We never say ask your teacher, which many sex ed videos do, because, you know, we don't want them going up in school and asking their English teacher, you know, about masturbation. So some do's and don'ts real quick. Do acknowledge and normalize any feelings, concern your child shares. Remember that this education is dynamic and ongoing. It's not a one-time talk, nor is it something that needs to be discussed every week. One of the things I always ask kids when they come to our program is, how many of you have talked to your parents about this? And less than half will raise their hand. And what I typically find is that, and I'm you know, something is better than nothing, but, you know, that fathers will have had a one-time talk when the kids are around 13. Well, you know, one of the things, and a lot of moms don't know this, puberty starts much earlier for boys than moms realize. It tends to, you know, the average age is like 11.5. So somewhere between 11 and 12, plenty of kids start at 10. 9 is also not unusual. You know, another thing, keep in mind that boys often do best during discussions when there's an activity to distract them so they don't have to make eye contact. So whether that's in the car, whether that's you're doing an activity together and so on. And one of the things that I do teach people is that I think it's really helpful if boys and young men learn how their bodies work from other men. You know, the sex education field, and most sex educators are female. There's very few male sex educators. And I have to say, I've seen some of the best sex educators in the country, and sometimes they get some things wrong when it comes to male anatomy. So, for instance, I've seen some say, that boys will have a wet dream before they ever, that's how they'll first ejaculate. Well, that's not accurate, because if you begin masturbating, then you're going to ejaculate, and you may never have a wet dream in your life. The other thing, just again real quick with that, I wanted to mention is I often find that many moms misperceive, masturbation as some kind of initiation into sexual activity. And realistically, kids begin to, discover that touching their genitals feels good when they're very young. And really, masturbation does not have a sexual connotation until the time of puberty. But even then, it does not mean that they have some kind of initiation into, sexuality. It means they've discovered something that feels good. Okay. So some don'ts, I always say, please don't shame them for the curiosity. So don't say things like, I can't believe you were watching that. Don't minimize their feelings of insecurity. Let them know that a lot of guys feel the same way they do. And please don't say things like, you don't know what you want yet, or you're too young to be thinking about that. Because when you do that, then that cuts off the chance for you to have open dialogue. I'm not going to show this video about pornography, but one of the things I definitely teach is the concept that pornography is, it's a product. It's used to sell products to men, and what pornography lacks is showing any kind of relationship development or emotional intimacy, and most importantly, it does not show consent. So we have to be very clear with kids why pornography is not okay. In the sense that it doesn't portray healthy relationships. One of the things that Isabel Hanal told me is that instead of asking kids, do you watch pornography, to say, when you watch pornography, what do you watch? And the reason for that is because if they are watching something that's, a fetish video or a rape video, things like that, then we want to move them away from that, because if they start watching that at a young age, that can really, turn into something that they're fixated on. So we want to kind of be proactive about that as soon as possible. So I do ask kids that, and the other reason why is, as some of you may know, we have a very big problem with individuals on the spectrum getting in trouble for downloading child pornography. A lot of times they don't even know what they're downloading. So, again, as we know, people on the spectrum tend to collect things. So one of the things is they tend to download massive amounts of pornography. And child pornography is so accessible today, and I don't completely understand the technical aspects of this, but if you download it, there's often what's called a tracker in it, which then sends your IP address on your computer to the FBI. So I have a colleague here who, if she wanted, could make a full-time job out of. She works with the public defenders to help keep guys on the spectrum out of jail. And unfortunately, she hasn't been successful a whole lot because if you download child pornography, that is a federal crime. That is not a local crime. The other thing is many individuals on the spectrum they're not able to tell somebody's age. So they can very innocently click on some type of child pornography, not realizing what it is, because of the age thing, and then they get into trouble. So something I tell both the kids and adults I work with is if you're going to look at pornography, you never download anything. Hey. So talking about, we just talked about consent. I teach that consent has a much broader context in sexual activity. So, for instance, you don't need to consent to something just because it's somebody you like or they're giving you attention. Another thing, and sorry for the spelling error there, I teach is that unwanted attention is not consensual. So if you're staring at somebody in school a lot, that is unwanted attention, and they didn't consent to that, and you're making them uncomfortable. One of the things I teach is I say 1 second per hour rule. So if you are attracted to somebody, you can look at them 1 second per hour, because I think it's really important that we assign a time frame of what's acceptable for our kids, because I find a lot, particularly in 6th grade, 7th grade, they have a tendency to stare a lot. And the other thing is if someone isn't interested in you, they might not say no directly, but no answer always means no. So if they give you kind of a cryptic answer, if you ask them on a date and they say, I'm not sure, take that as meaning no. Last thing, one of the last things is that sometimes we have to consider the lesser of two evils, and here's what I mean by that. So watching regular pornography is not as bad as watching rape fantasy or fetish pornography. And these, by the way, these are all situations I've dealt with. Masturbating to illustrations of adults in a puberty book is better than masturbating to online pornography. Masturbating 3 times a day at home, which is normal, by the way, is a much better option than masturbating at school. So, sometimes parents will, it's obviously most parents would say, well, I don't want my child watching pornography. And what I say is that's fine, and we talk about some appropriate resources you can give them, and I'm going to show you at the end here. But at the end of the day, if they want to watch it, I think it's really hard to completely block this now, given that we are in this interconnected world. I hear about a lot of kids watching pornography on the bus, obviously a lot on their phones when they're home after school and so on. So yes, I think we need to take all kinds of steps we can to block it. But at the end of the day, I think it's never going to be 100% successful. So if we do find our kids are watching it, and I do encourage parents to look at the browser, then you have a discussion about it. And again, we have to think about what's the lesser of two evils. So a few other things, acknowledge and normalize any feelings that your kid shares. Oh, I'm sorry, I went through this one already. Oops, so sorry about that. So thank you so much for participating today. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you have questions offline, you're welcome to check out my practice website, which is centeradhd.com. I do have a Facebook page for our Guy Stuff program, and I am available for consultation and trainings, so feel free to get in touch with me. And I want to show you some resources real quick before we finish up. This is Isabel Hinault's book. The program is really geared to more older adolescents, but it's a wonderful resource for teachers. And it's a great book, and she's just a phenomenal presenter. So that really kind of helped me shape a lot of the work I do. This is also a phenomenal book, Davita's book, Sexuality and Relationship Education for Children and Adolescents with Autism Spectrum Disorders. Anybody, I recommend this to everybody because she also touches upon the younger ages as well. And it's really geared more to educators, but again, wonderful book. These are Davita's 2 books for kids, the Growing Up book for boys and girls, beautiful illustrations in them. The one issue I actually had with it is in the boys' book, she left out masturbation, so I asked her why, and she said, because, I live in Ireland, and, I have to be a little bit careful about that stuff. But besides that, wonderful books. What I also like about these is they are accessible to kids whose reading level is not great. So, somebody who's at a 2nd, 3rd grade reading level, maybe 3rd grade reading level could read these. Last one is a book by Sarah Atwood. She is the wife of Tony Atwood, some of you might have heard of. It's called Making Sense of Sex. This is for older adolescents. Fantastic book. The one thing is it's not visual. It's very text heavy. So for kids who would actually read this and are interested, I always recommend this. She just has a really nice way of writing and knows how to speak to kids. And the last one, oops, sorry, it's Perfectly Normal. This is the #1 book on Amazon. This is from the Unitarian Church Sexuality curriculum called Our Whole Lives, which is a wonderful curriculum. And you can certainly look in your area to see if the Unitarian Church offers it. It's a really nice program, and this is their main book. Beautiful illustrations, shows diversity, shows people with disabilities. My one issue with this book is it's what I call A to Z, meaning they talk about everything from puberty to putting on a condom. And one of the things that I'd say is that it's not the ideal thing, because I feel like obviously kids in middle school or even our kids in high school, they don't need to know about putting on a condom, but I also don't think it's harmful in any way for them to see that, because it's done so tastefully, and it's really a wonderful book. And yeah, this is a #1 seller on Amazon. So thank you so much for participating today. I really appreciate you all being here, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, thank you to Jill as well, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. That was absolutely terrific. And I do have a couple questions that came in. One of them is just sort of logistical. Is it possible for you to provide links to the videos that are available on YouTube?
So is it possible to provide links? You know what, that's a good question. Nobody asked me that. I need to, most of them I downloaded, and I probably should have saved them. So what I would say is, most of the videos I use are from that website, amaze.org, and you can find them both on YouTube and at their website. It's a public health organization. And some of the other videos, for instance, like you can type in, how to wash your face for boys, things like that, and you'll see that stuff comes up. But yeah, I've pretty much downloaded everything, so I don't have them saved because I use this so much.
Okay. Yeah, not a problem. And I remember when I saw your presentation at the ASA conference that you had some additional videos that were just fantastic about hygiene, for example, or about asking a girl out on a date. And so, yeah, I think it would be nice to maybe offer those in our library, even apart from like your presentation, just to have that available for families. So that was a good question. Okay, moving on. So hold on, sorry. Could Ryan talk a bit more about why more ASD kids and teens identify as pansexual or bi, and how common is that?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And the reality is that we're not sure yet. There's different theories. One of the theories is because and this is one of the things that Isabel Hinault talks about, is that, they feel less of a need to conform to societal expectations. I've heard also that it has more to do with who they feel safe with, and the gender is less important. But at the end of the day, we still don't know yet exactly why, and it is quite common. I can tell you in the past year, and I'm just a little guy in the suburbs of Philadelphia. I mean, I've seen 2 kids on the spectrum who who are transgender.
Yeah,
I've heard about many more. Yeah.
Just totally, this is going to sound a little bit like a tangent. One of the things I do in the autism world is I fund research projects, and I just funded a research project at Harvard investigating this very question about differential gender expression in young people with ASD. And actually, the project that I just funded is related to certain. It's a long story, I won't get into details, but certain ancestral drug exposures to synthetic steroid hormone drugs. It's a very long story, but what I found talking to these families is that often the grandmother of these children with ASD were given very, very powerful estrogenic drugs. It was called DES, or diethylstilbestrol. And this was in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and into the early 70s. That this happened, and the grand offspring, who were, of course, germ cells in utero, when the drugs were given, were exposed. So it's a brand new study. It's not out yet, and if I hear anything, I'll let you know.
That's fascinating. Thanks.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is. It's a brand new area of research. So also, should we encourage our kids to focus more on dating other ASPs or ASD teens? Obviously, the stats are that there are far more boys with ASD. So this is a very limited dating pool, and this is from the mother of a 12-year-old boy with ASD.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think I would emphasize first is this whole idea that, you need to be really proficient in cultivating friendships and having a level of, closeness with other guys before you can ever delve into relationships. Because if you don't, relationships are never going to work, and that's just reality. So what I say to kids is that you need to have, 2 to 3 friends who you get together with outside of school. And I do a lot of teaching around how guys form friendships with each other, because that's something a lot of kids don't understand. In terms of the dating question, no, I don't think that it's necessary to encourage kids to look for other individuals on the spectrum, because reality is, statistically, obviously there's many less women who are diagnosed, so it's I think it would be difficult to do. But I can also tell you that I've seen some guys who, and I work with guys now who are in relationships with neurotypical women, and it's fine. Do issues come up? Sure, but for the most part it's totally fine. And I can't tell you how many kids I see whose father, who have a father who's on the spectrum, and is married to a woman who's not. So yeah, I don't think that's necessary to encourage it.
All right. Here's a common question I hear: is there a way to help gently introduce the idea of masturbation to a child who has not discovered it to reduce sexual preoccupation?
So what I would say is that I don't think it's necessary to introduce until they reach puberty, and I think the way to introduce it is by using any of these videos, or like the book. It's perfectly normal. They talk about it in the book, and I think that's the way to do it. One of the things I will tell you is, interestingly, a lot of boys on the spectrum, they don't figure out masturbation kind of the regular way other kids do, and they learn to do it by kind of rubbing themselves against a pillow or their bed and so on, which is not problematic. But one of the things I do teach kids is, again, the idea that what's expected is that you don't leave any evidence. But yeah, I don't think it's a concept you need to teach until right before puberty.
Yeah, her
so this
son's
weekend,
16.
Oh, okay. Then, I'm sorry. I thought you said 12. Okay. So for 16, yeah, I would definitely, show. There's the video on amaze.org about masturbation, and I would show that. It's really it's done really tastefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone's asking.
I think it'll help.
Okay. What age do you begin seeing boys in your groups?
So the youngest I do is for our guy stuff group is 5th grade. So I'm actually doing that this weekend. So last Sunday I did the parent session, and this week will be the dads or male family member and sons. So 5th grade.
All right. And let's see. My 18-year-old is very obese. Is it possible that his sexual development is delayed due to androgynous hormones?
Well, I'm not an endocrinologist, so I can't answer that one. I'm not really sure. I mean, one of the things when men are overweight is that their genitals can appear smaller than they are because of the added weight. But in terms of sexual development, like sexual interest, no, I don't believe that would be a possibility. If anything, my guess is he's probably just not comfortable talking about it, or like I mentioned, just kind of overwhelmed by the whole idea, and he tries to shut it off.
Okay. If your son is rubbing himself with his clothes on in bed or on the couch, how do you let him know lotion is an option in the bathroom? I'm a single mom and have trouble figuring out how to give him tools without crossing an appropriate parent-child line.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would say, that if you're teaching social appropriateness, and because you want him to learn how to be socially appropriate, which includes behavior in your house, there is no line to cross because you need to do that. So what I teach parents, and I deal with this one in particular all the time, is that I just, you kind of say a keyword or a key term. So, one of the things I'll tell parents to say is, weird thoughts, meaning you're having weird thoughts, because they need to understand other people's perception of their behavior, or you can just say, bedroom, or bathroom or whatever, but it's really important to address it. As for the lotion thing, I don't think it's necessary. But I do think it's important just to say, bedroom, or again, kind of weird thoughts, and what's expected is you do that in the bedroom. Yeah.
Okay, and final question. If I haven't noticed signs of our 16-year-old masturbating or wet dreams, should we still have a discussion about it? The concern is if the discussion or video might get him started with it sooner than otherwise.
Well, I guess my question back would be, what is the problem if he's doing it? So again, this is what I kind of addressed, that a lot of parents think that it's somehow, masturbation is an introduction to sexual activity, and it's not. And I would say at 16, if he's not, then my guess is either he's kind of tried to shut this off, or he's sexually preoccupied and you just don't know about it. But yeah, I think it is something important because, just in terms of all of this education, and again, it's not corrupting him somehow to teach him kind of what's a healthy, that we know is a healthy natural behavior.
All right, Ryan, we are out of time, but I want to thank you tremendously for your wonderful presentation today, and I want to assure everybody listening that we have been recording this and that it will be posted on our website, and you will also get a follow-up email from us, okay?
Jill, this is Trudy,
Yes.
and I just want to mention that Parents Helping Parents in San Jose does have a lot of materials on sexuality. We have videos on masturbation for men and women, and We even have a video called Undercover Dick and the Rules of Sex. So we have a lot of materials if you're curious about how to approach your child. We have those materials that maybe you sit down and watch a video together, or they can watch a video by themselves.
Thank you, Trudy. That's great to know. And we should put that on our website as well, on our webpage, so people know about that. Okay, well, thank you, everyone, and you'll hear from us soon.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jill and Trudy. I really appreciate your time today.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.